Hi and welcome to Emily's Walking Book Club discussing Sweet Days of Discipline by Fleur Jaeggy. And thanks so much to those of you who came along to the Zoom meeting last weekend. Thanks to lockdown number 2, we weren't able to meet in person, but it was great to see your lovely faces on my screen. Of course, it was such a poor substitute for the real thing, but still I think many of you found it very uplifting to at least see some friendly faces and have a bit of a discussion about a book, even if this book is so kind of cold and austere and tough, really. We did like the book, most of us. I think what we really felt was that it was quite hard to be really enthusiastic about such a cold book that really shuts the reader out. It's not a book where you're not sort of sucked in and get really in the head of the characters and the narrator. It's quite hard to empathise. It feels very much like Jaeggy has created this brilliant book and this brilliant world, but has sort of left you on the outside of it. I often think of her writing as a bit like being made out of diamonds, sort of glistening, beautiful prose that's very hard and very sharp, and I don't know, it's kind of extraordinary. I think her writing is really unlike anyone else's prose I've ever come across. So strong, you feel like each word really counts. It's so strong. It's very dense, and it's also at times kind of crystal clear. I don't know, it's hard to describe. Diamonds is the closest I've got. Yeah, and it seemed like most of us did really like it. And I should mention, of course, that it's originally written in Italian. This translation is by Tim Parks. In fact, one of our readers is going to now read it in the Italian and report back on the translation. So looking forward to hearing what they make of it. So we started off talking a bit about discipline, that word that's in the title, rules and order and pain and the kind of pleasure, weirdly, in all that, and how school itself in the book is very much a place of discipline. There's a feeling throughout the book that school is a place of waiting for real life to begin, I suppose. I mean, I certainly felt that when I was at school. I'm sure some of you did. And now that the narrator's looking back on that time, I think that it's with a realisation that actually, sadly, that's as good as it got. We compared it to Frost in May by Antonia White, which of course is the first Virago modern classic. It's another book we discussed in the book club, a great book, which we loved. Many of us said this really reminded them of that book. So yeah, we talked about discipline and control, I suppose, particularly as it's about a girls' boarding school, about that time of adolescence, especially as a girl, and how often girls want this feeling of control, and we talked a bit about eating disorders and that kind of thing. We also got into quite an interesting discussion about how, in some ways, the school and everything there was so obsessed with the rules that it led to a feeling of blindness to what's actually going on, that you can get so obsessed with the codes and the rules that you sort of miss what's actually happening. And this really resonated with a lot of us. And we then realised that, of course, at the end, the very last paragraph, the narrator goes back to the school. And I'll read a tiny bit out. It says, "I'm standing in front of the school building. 2 women are sitting on a bench. I greet them with a nod. They don't respond. I open the door. A woman sitting behind a table, another standing. She asks me what I want. I ask about the school. I say the name, she's never heard of it. And it goes on, and then it says, I'm mistaken, she says, I apologise. This, she says, is a home for the blind. That's what it is now, a home for the blind. So there's this feeling of blindness in the book. Death is everywhere. Every page there's sort of loads of references to death, gravestones, tombs. There's this sort of very chilling description of memory as being, your memory of people as being graves in the wall. That really stuck with me. And we talked a bit about death in the context of all this control as somebody, one of our walkers, readers, Zoomers, said it was a kind of perfection, that, you know, that was the ultimate control, to sort of control your life and taking it away. So yeah, pretty heavy discussion. I'll read a tiny bit out. So yeah, before I read this out, I should say that the book is, as I said, set in this school in the Swiss Alps. The narrator, we don't learn her name. She is kind of obsessed with this new girl called Frédérique. And there is quite a lot of desire, I suppose, in this book, but that feels like the wrong word. It's everything's so cold and kind of distorted by all the discipline that even what could be a kind of schoolgirl crush in a way, or a real love, just is slightly infected with this idea of control and discipline. So if I read this bit, it's on page 18. One winter afternoon, we were sitting on the stairs. Frédérique took my hands and said, "You've got an old woman's hands." Hers were cold. She looked at the backs of my hands. You could count the veins and the bones. She turned them over. They were shriveled up. I can hardly describe how proud I was to hear what for me was a compliment. That day on the stairs, I knew she was attracted to me. They really were an old woman's hands. They were bony. Frédérique's hands were broad, thick, square, like a boy's. Both of us wore signet rings on our little fingers. You might imagine that we found physical pleasure in touching each other like this. As she touched my hand, and I felt hers, cold, our contact was so anatomical that the thought of flesh or sensuality eluded us. That winter, I bought myself a loose pullover and hid my body. My old woman's hands were all the more obvious. So it just feels very unnatural in a way, very, very wrong, this idea of adolescence, which should be so kind of blooming and fleshy and sort of burgeoning, full of love and everything, and actually here it's all about oldness, kind of old before your time, death in life in a way, this frigidity, this wrinkled, shrivelling oldness. Somewhere in the book it says a senile childhood. It feels very strange and unnatural, very compelling. What else do we say? We also said that the book felt very kind of black and white. Someone emailed me about how she felt there was such a lack of colour in the book. All the girls' dormitories being very white. I suppose the whiteness of the snowy Alps. And we also talked a little bit about the very strange ending. Not the bit I read about the House for the Blind, but the Home for the Blind, but the bit where she meets Frédérique sort of in the years after school, and she's living in a very strange place where she almost thinks she's living off wax because there's just nothing there. It's this kind of empty room, very, very cold, and the candlesticks, the wax candlesticks, look like they've been kind of nibbled. So yeah, I suppose, what am I trying to say? I think it was quite a puzzling book. It felt like, you know, it's terribly thin, but terribly rich. There's a lot in there that we struggled to get our heads around, but we did find it very compelling. So yeah, that's what I have to say about Fleur Jaeggy. That she's published over here by And Other Stories, brilliant publisher, who do a lot of great work. Most of their books are in translation, quite avant-garde. And I recommend her other books. If you like this one, the SS Proletarka is another brilliant book by her. She's also written some short stories, and yeah, I think most of us were really glad to have discovered this writer, and I hope she kind of gets a bigger following over here. So thank you so much. Unfortunately now I can't now show you clips of our walk, which didn't happen. Yeah, but I hope that we'll meet in December and talk about Alan Bennett's The Uncommon Reader, which is a much more cheerful, sort of funny little stocking filler of a book, really, but a great one to read to lift your spirits. Thank you so much. Bye.